Radio TV phono nut here, and the other day I got a message from somebody through Facebook from a lady at a local church that said they had 4 televisions that I was welcome to have if I wanted them. Just come get them out of the way. Well, I don't like turning down free stuff, and you never know. That one time I turned down some TVs, that'll be the ones where there'll be an older set in the bunch that I might really want. Unfortunately, such wasn't the case today, but we'll still have some fun with these and do something with them. But anyway, they had a rummage sale a couple of months back, and I actually remember seeing these TVs at the rummage sale, and naturally they didn't sell. And she was telling me as we were going in, you just can't give these things away anymore. And I said, no ma'am, they all want flat screens now. They don't want nothing to do with anything like this. Now, she said these all supposedly work, but we'll probably do a little preventative maintenance on them. The first one here is a 19-inch Sanyo. I think this is just a basic mono entry-level set with RF only input. These were good entry-level TVs. It didn't give a whole lot of trouble. The main problems these gave were bad connections on the vertical deflection IC, and there was I think it was 100 microfarad cap in the vertical circuit that would fail and initially cause lines and fold over at the top of the screen. But usually what would happen, the owner would continue to watch the set that way, and then the cap would end up causing the vertical IC to burn open, short out and burn up, and then cook the fusible resistor that feeds B plus to it. And then there were some caps in the power supply that would sometimes fail, but generally speaking, good sets and had a decent picture. Let's see how old this one is. Well, I actually don't see a date on it. It's a model DS19390, but with this type of smooth power cord, I think that was a thing in the late 90s, early 2000s, so we're going to place it in that date range. Alright, let's see if it'll produce a raster. We have high voltage, that's good. And it looks like we have a raster, so that's a good sign. We'll go into all these in depth more in a little while. And they originally had $25 on this as well as the other ones. Yeah, good luck with that, but you know how rummage sales go. These prices are generally not carved in stone. I'm sure if you'd have offered them $5 a piece, they'd have probably taken it. Alright, the next one is a Samsung model TXH 1970 from 2000. This one has mono AV input. Now, I'm really not that familiar with this particular model. As I'm sure most of you know, Samsung and Gold Star was at one time bottom of the barrel entry-level crap. I think by the late 90s, early 2000s, they had sort of gotten their act together, but I still don't consider either one of them a Samsung or Gold Star, or LG as they're known today. I don't consider either one of those brands as a stellar brand. But what little I remember from these Samsung CRT sets from the later 90s, it was just basically routine things that went wrong with them. You know, power supply caps, vertical ICs, that sort of thing. I do think I remember fixing something similar to this for a friend of my dad's one time. It didn't have any vertical deflection, and there was a open resistor in the B plus line to the vertical circuit. So we'll plug this one in and see if it has a raster. Yep, 25 on that one too. Alright, that one fired up. It's got high voltage. And it has a raster. So you can see that this one's on channel 11, Tells me that this set probably hadn't been used since the analog turn off. Alright, so that's good. Alright, next we have an RCA, which is a 20-inch from 1996. This has stereo AV input. Uses a CTC 176 chassis. Now, the main thing that happened with these sets, and what I'm about to tell you applies to the CTC 175, 76, 77, all the way on up through the 203 chassis. These sets did not have a separate tuner that's soldered onto the circuit board. In fact, the tuner was actually a part of the main chassis. Well, the tuner grounds were not soldered properly from the factory, and when those solder connections would crack and cause intermittence, it would usually start off by causing all sorts of intermittent problems, especially snowy picture and vertical deflection issues. And then if the issue wasn't addressed, it would corrupt the EEPROM, and then that would usually either result in a set that was totally dead, or the parameter for the horizontal frequency would get thrown so far off that when you would try to power the set up, it would power up and then go into shutdown. But other than that, it was basically just all the usual common stuff that normally goes wrong with TVs. Rarely ever saw a bad picture tube in one of these, but when I did find a bad tube in one, they usually did not rejuvenate very well. I don't know that this one's ever been soldered on, but we're probably going to open it up and solder on it just to be on the safe side. But let's plug it in and see what happens. Alright, power. Alright, we have high voltage, we have audio. And we have a raster. So this one will probably turn out to be okay. And the final, I had to switch cameras. The battery died on the other one, but as I was saying, this is a 25-inch Sanyo from July 2003. This looks like basically the 25-inch version of that 19-inch set, except this one does have mono AV inputs. And these sets had the same common problems that the 19-inch version had. So let's plug this in and see if it has a raster. I feel like it probably does. Alright, here we go. Yep, we have high voltage. And we have a blue screen. We're set on video mode. Now, can we get this out of video mode without a remote? Okay, that's volume. Alright, menu. I don't know that we can. I don't think we can get this out of video mode without a remote. So I'm going to have to find a remote, it looks like, to get this one out of video mode. But they had two other TVs. One of them was a 27-inch Sony from probably the late 90s. It was on one of those roll-around metal carts like what we all had in school back in the day. And then there was, I didn't even catch the brand of it, but there was some silver plastic crap 27-inch TV, DVD, VCR combo. And the first lady I dealt with, she seemed to think I could have them, and then the other lady there seemed to think they still used them, so we just left those two there. But they know who I am, they know how to get in touch with me, and I feel like when they decide they don't want those TVs anymore, I'll probably be getting a phone call or a message. But anyway, I ended up handing them $20. Even though they were giving me the televisions, I felt better about giving them a small donation. You know, since this apparently is a legitimate church, and they didn't want to take the money, but I talked them into it. You know, I don't have a problem with helping churches and other entities that are actually on the up and up, but when you got churches like that one I described in a recent video where it seems like all they're doing is having sales to fatten the preacher's wallet, then I have a bit of problem with that. And as you might recall, that's the church where I wanted to buy a 20-year-old Panasonic DVD player, and you thought I was trying to buy some valuable vintage item. But long story short, apparently they can't do anything at that church without calling the preacher to find out what he wants for it, and I'm just not going to go through all that hassle. And the price they ended up quoting me for that DVD player, I could have gone to Walmart and bought a brand new one. Alright, we have the converter box connected to the Sanyo, and it might help if I connected the correct...
I didn't know how fast he was, and
there we go.
World record 200.
But yeah, that's got a pretty decent picture. Now,
an average of 23.
Like I said, we need the remote to get this to RF mode, and then even at that, we don't know if the tuner works. It probably does, but we don't know that.
He tells me he didn't clean his wings off.
Really a stupid design on Sanyo's part. They should have designed this where you could use the channel up or down buttons to select video mode, or put an input button on the front of the set, or allowed you to get in the menu and change it over, but they don't. You've got to have the remote that the set came with. I think the reason these types of sets are so hard to get rid of is the fact that in order to pick up anything on one, you need a converter box, and most people are not going to pay $10, $15, $20 for a TV like this and then have to pay another $30 or $40 or $50 for a converter box to pair with it. And it's getting so those boxes are hard to find on a walk-in retail store level, at least in my area, which means you have to order them. And surprisingly, I still run into people that do not understand that you can't pick up anything on these older TVs without a digital to analog converter box. And then I run into other people who think that you can't even pick up anything out of the air, period, anymore. I know somebody I know told me that on 2 different occasions they were in a thrift store and somebody was returning a couple of CRT sets that they bought for $5 or $10 because they didn't work. And then when the thrift store refused to give them their money back, they acted ghetto and started pitching a fit and threatening to come back and do bodily harm to the employees of the thrift store if they didn't give them their $5 back. So they ended up giving them their money back and told them to get out and don't come back. And I can guarantee you the only thing wrong with the TVs is probably nothing at all wrong with them. It's just they don't have a converter box, and they went home and connected an antenna straight to the TV and punched in channel 11, 24, 30, or whatever, and all they got was snow on the screen, and, oh, well, this don't work. I'm taking this back. I actually know a fella who wanted a Sanyo, a later model Sanyo CRT television, because he had a couple of them. I've actually done YouTube videos on fixing them before, and then one of them lightning struck, and it was no longer feasible to be repaired at that point. And then his house burned down, and he lost the televisions and everything else he had. The last I heard, he was living in an assisted living community, but he was planning on moving back home when he got his house rebuilt. But I think this fella has got some issues, some mental issues, and I'm not sure that he'll ever be able to go back home. But before all this happened, he told me that if you find a Sanyo TV like the one I had, I want it. So if he ever resurfaces, he's probably going to end up getting both of these Sanyo TVs, this one and the little 19-inch set. But yeah, I think if you could still connect an antenna to these sets and pick up something over the air, they still wouldn't be easy to get rid of, but I think they would be easier to get rid of than they are now. You know, some older person might buy something like this, especially if they lived in a rough neighborhood, because something like this wouldn't be as likely to get stolen. Alright, here's the inside of the 25-inch Sanyo. Looks to be a very low hours TV based on the absence of crud on the inside. Here's the picture tube. Do we see an EIA number on here? I don't know. Alright, I see no EIA number, just made in Mexico, so who knows who made that picture tube. Here's the chassis. Looks pretty typical for an early 21st century television. And of course this uses a switch mode power supply, which most TVs by that time used. This is our chopper transistor here. Over here is our horizontal output transistor. As you can tell, they've gotten a lot smaller than what they used to be. And then over here we have our vertical IC, and I think it was this capacitor right here that was bad about drying out and causing the problems I mentioned. Well, it goes into focus and then it goes out of focus. Let's try that again. I'm still with the old camera here. Okay, this is just not going to cooperate, but a couple of these pins on this vertical IC look a little iffy. The solder looks a little darker than the other connections. Just depends on which angle you look at the board, so we're going to resolder that just to be on the safe side. Now in these later CRT sets, they use these flat pack surface mounted ICs that are not as conducive to repair as the through hole parts. Yes, it can be done, but it's often not worth doing. Even when these sets were newer, when you could go to Walmart and buy one of these for what, $150, nobody was going to pay a shop that much in labor and parts to change one of those ICs, and those ICs are generally pretty reliable unless lightning lowers the boom on the set, and then if that happens, then you know, all bets are off. Alright, that focuses a little bit better on the vertical IC. I mean, look a little bit questionable, so when in doubt, just resolder. Alright, I resoldered that IC and I replaced that 220 microfarad cap just to be on the safe side, and I also resoldered the horizontal driver transformer, the horizontal output transistor, and the chopper transistor, and this thing looks to be in pretty good shape. It's not heat discolored or anything like that, so I think this TV's probably got a lot of life left in it. Alright, let's see what happens.
Okay, we got all that.
And we're working.
Passing on the river, we're heading east.
Get it on something that won't be as likely to get us nailed on. And let's break our converter box at the same time. Alright, this one seems to be okay. Now let's move on to Sanyo number 2. Alright, here's the 19-inch Sanyo. This one's a little bit dirtier on the inside, so I'd say it's had a lot more time on it than the last one has. And this one, the font type on this CRT label looks like what we'd see on the bonded yoke RCA Thompson tubes, only this is not a bonded yoke. Well, I briefly saw EIA 553 before the camera went out of focus, and I think this tube was also made in Mexico, so whatever 553 is will correspond to who made this tube. Now this chassis, I think it's probably a little older. It does not have a switching power supply. It has the probably an STR 30123 or something like that in it, one of those series pass regulators. And usually what happens on these types of sets is the horizontal output transistor was short, usually because of a bad flyback, and when that happens it usually takes the regulator and the supporting components with it. Not saying that happens to this particular chassis a lot, but on all of these types of sets with this type of power supply and horizontal sweep circuit, that's generally what sent them to the junkyard, because most people wouldn't pay for a flyback replacement and something like this. Also, we can see this one is old enough to have through-hole ICs, and we can see some discolored areas on the circuit board, so that tells us that this thing has gotten pretty warm. So this one's probably going to be due for some more extensive solder touch-ups. Well, surprisingly, the solder looks pretty good under here, but I am going to resolder this vertical IC. The single inline package type was the one that was worse for developing bad solder connections. We're going to go ahead and hit that while we're here. Alright, I resoldered a bunch of questionable connections, including the vertical output IC, the horizontal driver transformer, some of this stuff over here in the area that had gotten hot, and I replaced 3 capacitors just out of good measure: the 220 microfarad pump-up cap in the vertical circuit, the 47 microfarad regulated B+ filter. If that opens, that'll cause the horizontal output to blow. And I replaced the 10 microfarad 250 volt boost filter capacitor that's in the B+ line to the video output stage. If that capacitor fails, depending on the set, it'll cause a bright screen with retrace lines, or half of the screen will be darker than the other half, and there might be horizontal streaks all throughout the picture. So those are the 3 most common capacitors to fail in these later model CRT sets. And I think this is a 98 model, if I hadn't already mentioned that. I think I saw a date code on one of the parts. We'll say this is a 98 model TV. Alright, now we're ready to put this back together and see what it does. And I also resoldered the CRT socket, these load resistors here, the 3 video output transistors, and this cable here to the CRT socket board. Alright, let's connect this one up and see what it looks like. Alright, let's see how it goes. I think this was on 4 if I remember right. Our box says, yeah, that's on 4. Okay, that looks pretty good.
President Vladimir Putin. That's according to the New York Times.
Now, the volume is not going to get as loud on these sets as it should, because I think my volume is turned down on the box, and I don't have the remote for the box.
Weapons and military support.
But yeah, this looks like it's got a good picture.
In exchange, North Korea would your generation.
Alright, we're back together again. I did tweak the focus control ever so slightly.
They kind of like grab their crotch. Put it in between negative.
Let's get this to the news channel.
Devices to stop young people from developing bad habits. Warren also said the government does not plan to raise
this one's got a pretty decent picture.
2023.
So I think we're about ready to move on to back to the other camera. It's probably charged by now, and then we'll tackle the last 2 TVs. Here's another TV I picked up recently, a 1995 Zenith 19-inch entry-level set. No AV inputs, mono audio, just a plain basic gray cabinet. Bottom of the line chassis that uses a series pass regulated power supply, not a switch mode power supply, and there was numerous bad connections on the chassis I had to fix, and the picture tube was very weak. I popped it with my Syncor CR70, which we need to repair. It does not, for some reason, it will not properly register emission, but it will still rejuvenate a tube. So I popped this one, and it still takes it a couple of minutes to fully warm up. But I'm more or less doing a Shango style experiment on this one. Not really to the degree that he's doing it with his Packard Bell, but I put this one in here on August the 25th, and I'm just going to watch it here in the kitchen, and we're just going to see how long it lasts before the picture degrades to being unacceptable. This is September the 4th, and quite frankly, I'm surprised it's lasted as long as it has, to be honest with you, because these tubes were crap to begin with. And is that this tube green gun trying to short, or is that something else in the programming? I think it must be in the programming. But anyway, this TV I got from a thrift store. I could have probably got it for free, but I give him $5 for it, mainly because it's an independently run thrift store. They really don't take TVs anymore, but he said sometimes we find them when we show up for work, and then we have to do something with them. So I've let him know what I'm looking for, the older sets with knobs. So maybe if I buy something from him every now and then he'll be more inclined to save something that I really want. Now, as far as the collectability of these black plastic crap sets, who knows what the future holds. I mean, I'm already seeing completed listings on eBay, especially for like the little 13-inch sets like that Sanyo we fixed a while back. Those are selling in the $50 to $60 range plus shipping, and it just really blows my mind why anybody would get on eBay and do that, because it's not like these sets are that uncommon. I promise you, pretty much regardless of where you're located, if you get out and do a little looking on a Saturday morning, thrift stores, yard sales, estate sales, curb shopping, whatever, I guarantee you can come home with one of these little 13-inch or 19-inch black plastic crap sets for your video game, and you will not have to pay a ludicrous eBay price to get it. I think a lot of that eBay crap is more of a case of I've got to have it right now, and I can't be bothered to get out and go look for one, and I've got the bucks to pay for it, so just click the buy it now button and have it delivered to my door and hope it isn't busted when it gets here. But as far as the collectability in the future of these, who knows? I know back in the 90s people said that 1960s color roundies and early rectangular screen tube color sets were junk that would never be worth anything, but now there's people paying, in some areas there's people paying hundreds of dollars for nice examples of those. So who knows what will happen with the black plastic crap and the silver plastic crap sets 10 or 15 years from now. I really don't think they're going to be very common in 10 or 15 years. You know, it's like in the early to mid 90s whenever I was finding tube and hybrid and early transistorized TVs left and right. Well, at that time such TVs were 20, 25, 30 years old. Well, now this is 2023, and a 30-year-old set today would have been made in 1993. So we're basically seeing what I'm finding today is in the age range is what the tube sets, the later tube sets, were in the early to mid 90s whenever I was finding them left and right. That's when everybody was getting rid of the late 60s, early 70s Zenith and RCA and Magnavox and what have you sets. Yeah, I think that's something in the programming, that flashing green. I don't put it on something else for a minute. But anyway, so yeah, so we're seeing basically the same trend as what I was seeing 30 years ago, except the sets we're seeing today are from the early 90s instead of from the late 60s, early 70s in that time period. So there you go. So I'm just going to run this Zenith in my kitchen, and whenever it gets to the point where the picture looks like total crap, then I'll update you and we'll see how long this tube lasts. I mean, like I said, I'm surprised it lasted this long. There's a crap tube. These Zenith tubes from the 90s for the most part were crap to begin with, and it's kind of hard to expect a miracle out of rejuvenation when a tube was crap to start with, but we'll just see how long it lasts. Even under good circumstances, rejuvenation should be considered a temporary fix, not a permanent measure. But I also realize that nobody's building new picture tubes, nobody's rebuilding old picture tubes. Finding a replacement tube can sometimes be challenging, so oftentimes rejuvenation or adding a brightener is your only recourse to squeeze a little bit more life out of a vintage television. Alright, so let's go outside. Alright, the Sanyo's still playing well, so let's move it to the side and move the Samsung up here. Alright, 2000 Samsung, what do you do? I think this was the one that was still on channel 11. Okay.
UPS drivers, writers, actors.
This one actually has a decent picture. I'll open it up and see if there's any bad solder connections, but
a union representative is demanding for a significant.
This one actually has a little bit sharper picture than the little Sanyo does, believe it or not.
They are prepared to.
Alright, here's the inside of the Samsung. This has a Samsung branded tube. There's the little single printed circuit board chassis that's pretty dusty. Both this and the little Sanyo have got some white paint residue on them, so I have an idea that both sets probably came from the same place. Here's the vertical IC, couple of connections on that looking a little bit iffy. So we're going to just shotgun all the pins on that, and there's our horizontal output transistor right there. We're going to hit that and a few other critical areas, and then we're probably going to call this one done too. Okay, I just messed up, and do I want to fool with this, or do I just want to scrap this and take the tube out of this set and put in the Zenith? I was done with everything, trying to slide the chassis back in place. The high voltage wire got caught on something, and then whenever I was trying to slide the chassis in, well, you can see what happened. Now, do I want to try to fix this board, or do I want to just say to hell with it? And this is a very crappy circuit board because it didn't take much pressure to do that. And I'm starting to lean towards more not fooling with this and just saving the tube and putting it in that Zenith set in there when the time comes. Now, probably what I'm going to have to do in order to get this board to fit back together in the crack here is take this Flyback transformer off and snap it back together, and then we'll have to run wires from point A to point B and then see if the set works. I'll tell you, this ain't the worst one I've ever fixed. I think the worst one I ever fixed was some Apex or something TV DVD combination that got dropped, and the lady who owned it wanted it fixed at all cost because it belonged to a deceased family member gave it to her not long before they passed away, and she wanted it fixed because of that. Well, the problem with the set that's dropped, not only could it damage the circuit board, it could also knock the shadow mask loose in the picture tube. And of course, the only way you would know that is if you connected the tube to a working chassis or fixed the chassis you already had. But I took a chance and painstakingly jumpered out all of the bad connections, and the TV worked, and she was happy and she paid me. The second one that comes to mind was a little 19-inch Sanyo, just like the one we just did some preventative maintenance on. And the lady brought it to me and told me that it had just stopped working. It wouldn't turn on one day. And she told me it was her kids' TV in their bedroom. Well, I opened it up and it had a cracked circuit board. So the first thing that came to mind was the kids knocked the TV off and it cracked the board, and they didn't want to tell Mama that they broke the TV. Well, when she came to pick up the set, the kids were with her, and I showed her what happened to the TV, and I said the only way this could have happened is if it got dropped. And she ripped those kids a new butthole right there in front of me. Alright, taking a break from the Samsung, let's see what the RCA does.
people can visit the Acropolis in Athens. The famous archaeological site typically sees around 23,000 visitors per day. But now
all right, Channel 3.
At 20,000. You'll also need to book a ticket online. The government is making the change
It looks
to prevent
fair.
overcrowding and to preserve the monument. July 4th
Let me
is
turn the
known for
focus
Long Island's
control on the
hot dog
Flyback.
contest. Not to be
These have the
overlooked,
focus control sticking out the back of the set, so it's very easy to... Let me put this on a channel that's got some... Yeah, I think I saw a little flickering whenever I touched the set. See, when I wiggle the RF connector, you saw it kind of go berserk there for a second. I think this one probably needs some soldering done to it. Put this on 14 whatever channel. It's got all that public radio on it with the text on the screen.
The other one is Eu Gosto Dela.
Okay, that's about as sharp as it's going to get. Okay, we had the back off of the RCA, and in order to get the chassis where you can service it, it's a little bit different than most 90 sets. You have to remove 2 bolts underneath here that hold this whole plastic piece in. Then you slide the whole thing out, remove this nut that holds the coax cable in place, and then you have to cut this tie off that holds the power cord here. And then there'll be this little thingy-madoodle peg here that you have to pull out in order to release this bracket that secures the AV input jacks. And then I think there's a bolt up here that you have to take out, and then once you do all that, you can slide the board out. But this is that tuner assembly that I was talking about. It's not a tuner that you can simply replace. And another drawback to that is if one of the little surface mounted parts like an IC in this tuner goes bad, then you're forced to have to repair it. Whereas if it was a separate solder on tuner, you could just pop the tuner out, replace it, and be done with it. This set is also pretty clean on the inside, and the outside's a little dirty, but I suspect that's because the TV's probably been in storage for years, and that's probably how the outside got dirty. So I got all the bolts out, and we just need to push this peg out, and then we can slide this other plastic piece out, and then the bracket will come off. Then we need to unscrew this retainer nut for the RF connector, and then the board should just slide out of the plastic, and here's where that other retainer bolt goes that holds the board in the plastic frame here. Alright, here's the chassis removed from the set, and here's the shield cover we need to get off, and this does not look like it's ever been removed. So this is one of the rare ones that never got a solder job, so we're going to need to get our desoldering braid and our solder sucker and get this good and hot, suck all the solder out of it, and then pull this shield cover off and then resolder everything under there. Alright, the cover is now loose. Let's get it off of here. There we go. And you see, let me try to get this here. Yeah, just go out of focus just when I'm about to hit the record button. But the perimeter around these shields here, you see where it's soldered to the circuit board, those ground tabs become cracked and cause all sorts of intermittent problems here. All that needs to be resoldered. And you see that little surface mounted IC there and all these other little surface mounted parts. Alright, so let's carefully do this and hope we don't screw up anything. And I think we got it all. I resoldered all of these perimeter shields as well as these takes here that hold the bottom shield in place, and a couple more things here that attach to a shield. So we're now going to put the cover back on and hope we didn't screw up something. With the Samsung, we seem to be on a roll with screwing up today, so let's hope that roll doesn't continue into the RCA. Alright, we're all back together except for the little plastic tie here on the power cord, and that's really not mandatory. I think that tie was more of of an indicator to see if anybody's been tampering with this, as in a warranty claim or whatever. But anyway, this chassis, other than the tuner issues, I really don't remember any vertical problems with these sets other than those that were caused by the tuner grounds. Saw very few bad flybacks in these sets. Occasionally I'd run into a bad regulator IC, which is that STK pack there, and there was a high value resistor. I can't remember if it was a 1 meg or a 10 meg. It might have been higher than that, but that resistor would just open. I think it was underrated, and it would cause the set to be dead. I remember the last one of those I fixed was a 27-inch console that an elderly man gave me. Very well taken care of, and I fixed the bad solder connections and replaced that resistor, and the TV worked fine. And I tried to give it back to him because even 10 years ago I knew I couldn't get rid of it, and he said, no, I don't want it back, I've already bought a new one. So I ended up trying to give it away on Facebook, and everybody turned it down when they found out it wasn't a flat screen. And the flea market, one of the flea markets, I know the guy that owns it, and he said, why don't you bring it down here and let me sell it on consignment. Well, after about 6 months, I think he got me 20 bucks for it. Alright, let's see if I fixed it or broke it worse. Well, had high voltage and then it went off. So what happened? Hit it again. There it comes. Yeah, I guess we still got something. I got audio. Alright, now channel 3. Alright, there we go. That's good. Or at least I hope it's good anyway. As far as that little blip there with the off on, I do remember these switches getting a little flaky sometimes. And that was just the nature of those switches. But I adjusted the screen and the focus. I would like to get in the service menu and check the grayscale, but I don't remember how to get in the service menu. Now, 15 years ago, I could have rattled it off, but I basically stopped working on these sets, and some of the stuff I knew about them, I tried to forget, if you know what I mean. But these types of sets, the only adjustments that are made mechanically is the focus and screen control on the Flyback. Everything else is adjusted through a service menu, and to my knowledge, these Thompson, RCA, and GE, and ProScan, and whatever other brands, store brands these were sold under, were the first ones that I know of that were completely adjusted through the microprocessor. And they're the only set I know of that had that whacked out tuner arrangement. Now, had that arrangement been so great, why didn't everybody else use it too? But I think the CTC 170 series chassis was introduced in '92. It's hard to believe that was 31 years ago. The first one I remember, and I remember this vividly, the first one I remember seeing was a 27-inch LXI branded Sears set that was built for them by RCA Thompson, and it was just out of warranty and just in showing the symptoms of bad tuner grounds, as in intermittent snowy picture, vertical sweep, intermittent issues. And I remember looking at that set and thinking, what a piece of junk. Now, admittedly, all of us in the service industry made tons of money off of these sets, but so I guess they weren't all bad in that respect. But it was really a stupid design on Thompson's part. Now, this set could also stand to be degaussed. I can see a little, not on all scenes, but there's a little minor purity stain here. But if degaussing it doesn't work, there's really not much we can do with these, because this CRT uses a bonded yoke and a non-adjustable beam bender on it for convergence and purity and all that. So it is what it is. Alright, dark 30 is about to get here, and I'm tapping on the tuner shield and ain't nothing going berserk, so I think that means we probably fixed it. So we're going to put it back together, and that's about all I'm going to do with this. Yeah, it was usually pretty easy to tell if one of these sets had been in a shop before, because you'd be surprised how many of them I would get where pieces were missing. For example, the little reinforcer bracket for the AV jacks, that might be gone. The little peg thing that holds the bracket on might be missing. The single screw on the front of the plastic thing that holds the chassis in place might be gone. The screws under the bottom that holds the plastic thing to the cabinet, those might be gone. And every time I junked out one of these sets for lightning or a bad picture tube or whatever, I'd always save all that hardware, because usually I would need it. And that's one of my pet peeves with TV shops, the ones that were just sloppy and didn't put everything back. You know, if you took it off, put it back. It's that simple. Also remember the hospitals having some TVs like this in the patient rooms. Of course, theirs were hospital grade sets that had more features on it than the standard Walmart special has, but I do remember seeing these in the hospitals. Of course, the last ones I saw looked pretty well spent. Well, most of them were. Most of them stayed on more than they stayed off, and they were worn out by the time I saw them. But this one here doesn't look like it's had a lot of time on it. Now, as far as the Samsung that I goofed and cracked the circuit board, I'll look at it tomorrow and we'll make a decision. The biggest thing I'm worried about with that, and I've had this happen before, I'd fix all the cracks that I saw and then it still wouldn't work, and then there'd be some minute crack somewhere that was very hard to see and very hard to track down. So, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm throwing in the towel, but I don't want to spend several hours fixing that cracked board for a TV that I'd be lucky to get $5 for, and then turn it on and it don't work because there's some hairline crack somewhere that I couldn't see. So it may just get sacrificed for the picture tube when the time comes to do something with that Zenith in there. Well, the TV's still working, and it's coming back to me about some of the problems he's had. I'd mentioned the STK regulator IC failing, and usually what took that out was a hard short on the B+ line, and usually what shorted was the rectifier diode coming off of the 130 volt line on the switching power supply. That would short and draw too much current, and usually what would happen at first, the power supply would start squealing, and if you didn't unplug it pretty quick, that IC was going to smoke. And I run into a few shorted horizontal output transistors that usually those would blow either because of a bad flyback, which was very rare, and there was also a blue capacitor in there, I think, that would open and it would screw up the pin cushion, and if you kept running the set it would blow the horizontal output transistor. But that's, and then the B+, the boost filter for the video output stage, that cap would open sometimes. But like I said, the tuner problems were by far the biggest issue with these sets. I just don't know why it took RCA so long to go back to using a regular tuner. Now, on another note, you've heard of these kids taking the Tide Pod challenge. Well, I'm taking the no air conditioning challenge, but I don't think it's going to last much longer. Last power bill was about $200, and from what I'm seeing and hearing, that's one of the cheaper power bills. I'm hearing of people getting power bills in the $400 to $600 range, but like I said, mine was about $200, and in my mind that's ridiculous when I'm keeping the air conditioner on 80 degrees. So Friday the temperatures were a little cooler outside, so I decided to open the windows and turn on the attic fan, and it's now Monday night and it's kind of uncomfortable in there, so I've got a feeling the air conditioner is about to be coming back on, but at least it was off for a few days. The power bill ought to get a little lower. Now fall will be here the end of September, but that don't necessarily mean we're going to get fall temperatures. I've seen it be over 100 degrees here well into October, so you know, and I'm not looking forward to 30s and 40s, but I wouldn't mind some 70s and low 80s and lower humidity. Yeah, as far as flyback failures in these Thompson era RCAs, about the only ones I remember giving trouble were the ones in the CTC 185. That one liked to eat flybacks for some reason, and I think the CTC 195, or was it the 197? I don't remember, but those like to eat flybacks. And the CTC 203, which was used in sets from 19-inch all the way up to 36-inch. The 19 through 27-inch were pretty reliable, but the 32 and 36-inch sets love to eat flyback transformers, and the only reason I can come up with that was they were probably using an underrated flyback transformer to drive that bigger tube, and it just couldn't handle the stress. Now, the chassis that came along after the CTC 203, I'm trying to think of some of those numbers, the M134C, and then there was an ITC 008, and then I think there was an ATC something or another, I don't remember, but by that time I think Thompson had handed RCA off to somebody else, and it had basically become just a low tier brand of Chinese made junk TVs, and those ITC and MTC or whatever they were chassis, that they were so bad at eating flybacks and having bad CRTs and other weird problems that I wouldn't even take, it got so I wouldn't even take one in, because it was just a waste of time. Those were, as far as later model CRT sets, those later Chinese RCAs were probably some of the worst. They'd make a Funai look high-end. Alright, so I guess tomorrow we will look at the Samsung that I Major League blew it on and see if I can fix that crack. And if I decide it's not worth fixing, then it will just get parted out for the tube for that Zenith. Alright, back on the Samsung that I so stupidly messed up. I decided to give this a go, so I removed the flyback transformer to get the excess weight off of that corner of the board while I tried to get the crack mended. And in order to remove the flyback transformer, we use this mechanical solder sucker here, along with some desoldering braid. This stuff right here is generally what I use. Kimwick 10-25L. I usually order 2 spools of it at a time. That stuff's not cheap, but as far as desoldering braid goes, that's the good stuff. So we got the flyback transformer off the circuit board, and then I mended the crack back together as best I could. I couldn't get this right here as even as I'd like, but I didn't want to take a chance on breaking the circuit board worse than it is by flexing on it and all that, so I got it back together on this end here, and then we took some JB weld and put it back together. I'm going to wait on that to cure, and then we'll Then we'll put the flyback transformer back in and mend all the cracks back together. And you can see where the crack runs from right here all the way down to right there. Now I'm going to tell you an incorrect way of doing this. You do not simply scrape off the insulation on the foil trace to expose the copper and then put a blob of solder across it. There was a TV shop in town back in the 90s, and well, let's just say he finally went out of business, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer fella, if you know what I mean. He was one of those that would butcher up a TV and then expect me to fix it for $2, or he would want to give me some old crap television that he couldn't fix in exchange for fixing one he had, and I just quit fooling with him. He's also the type that would, for example, replace the rectifier diodes on a power supply board and then charge the customer for replacing the whole board. One time he resoldered some bad connections in a tuner in a Magnavox set and charged the guy for a new tuner, and he wanted me to ride with him to help him deliver the set. It was a big console, and when we got to the customer's house, as it turns out, this was a guy that my dad had known for years, and he recognized me, and I thought, oh crap, when this TV craps out again, he's going to associate me with this guy, and then my name's going to be mud. But I got all over that guy when I found out what he had done. I said, if all you do is resolder some loose connections, you do not charge the customer for a whole tuner. I said, that's just plain dishonest. And his reasoning was, well, I've got to cover my butt in case those connections that I resoldered really wasn't the issue, and I ended up having to put a new tuner in the set. And I said, no, what you do is you run the set for a day or two non-stop and make sure it's going to be okay. And then if by some chance it turns out not to be okay after you deliver the set, then you just eat it. But I said, you don't go pulling dishonest crap like that. And this same guy would sabotage televisions that they wanted it to make it look like lightning had struck, so he'd jump B+ all over the chassis and just burn it up, and I chewed his butt out about that too. I said, you know, there is something called insurance fraud, and people have been known to go to jail for that. But as I was saying, he was one of them that would take the lazy way out and scrape the insulation off of the traces and put a blob of solder across there, and then eventually it would just break loose. The proper way to do this is to neatly run hookup wire from point A to point B. And yes, it's time consuming, but that's the best way to do it. Once you stabilize the circuit board with some epoxy or whatever, and you can just run hookup wire from point A to point B on each trace that's broke, and there you go. Just to show you how bright this guy was in other areas, I remember one set that came in, a little 19-inch set that wouldn't power up, and he diagnosed it as a bad microprocessor. And then he took a microprocessor out of another chassis that wasn't even the correct part and put it in that set, and of course it still wouldn't power up. And it ended up being a problem with the standby power supply. I fixed that for him, and then I said, where's the microprocessor that came out of this set? So fortunately he still had it, and the one he put in there didn't even have the same part number on it as what came out of there. And I told him, I said, they don't print these numbers on these parts just because they have some extra ink they don't know what to do with. So I put the original microprocessor back in the set, and it fired right up. See, that was the kind of crap he would pull that would make it very difficult to fix some of the TVs that he got a hold of, and that's the reason I finally just quit fooling with him. Somebody brought in a Zenith Chromacolor 2 floor model. It was one of those in the, what they call it, the panorama cabinet, and he just knew the picture tube was bad. I said, the picture tube's not bad, it's another fault. It's not the picture tube. He just had it in his head the picture tube was bad, and he wanted me to replace it. So we went down to the parts house, got a picture tube, put it in the set. Well, I installed it in the set, and then it still did the exact same thing it was doing before. And then he started throwing a fit and cussing and raising Cain and talking about an old ass TV that should have been thrown away 20 years ago. And I said, look, I tried to tell you that the original picture tube was not the problem. Don't be talking about the TV being an old ass piece of shit, as he called it, that needed to have been thrown away 20 years ago. You know, it's not the TV's fault that you misdiagnosed it and refused to listen to anybody. And as I remember, the problem ended up being a bad G2 control. I think it was the blue one that was burned. Replaced that, TV worked fine, and that's all it needed in the first place. And then after that, he didn't want to pay me then for doing that tube swap. So after that, I just pretty much quit dealing with him. Not only because of the money situation, it was because of I didn't want people to get wind that I was associated with him, and then that would ruin my name. It's like my mother used to tell me, people judge you by the company you keep. But anyway, enough rambling about the crooked TV repairman that's no longer in business. We'll let this continue to fully harden, and then we will put our flyback back in and jump everything out and hope for the best. And one other odd thing about this set and a lot of modern TVs, if you notice, the horizontal output transistor isn't even mounted to a heatsink. I remember back in the earlier days of solid state color TVs, those used a big TO3 cased horizontal output transistor that was mounted to a massive heatsink. And in later years they started building the damper diode inside of the transistor itself. That was pretty much the standard practice from about the early 80s on up to the end of the CRT TV era. And all you folks who are using these 80s and 90s and 21st century CRT sets, what you see in front of you is eventually going to be the nail in the coffin when your TV is going to become unusable and unrepairable. This is the flyback transformer. And just to give you a little background, in the earliest days of solid state TV, they often used a flyback transformer that was very similar to what you would see in a vacuum tube based set. And in those days they often used a vacuum tube high voltage rectifier, with the rest of the set being solid state. Well, shortly thereafter they started using a smaller flyback transformer that had an output of, say, we'll say about 9,000 volts, and then they would run the output of the flyback through what's called a high voltage tripler. And this tripler often contained the focus divider network, which was nothing more than a bleeder resistor, a voltage divider resistor that took the high voltage for the second anode and then divided it down and for the focus voltage for the CRT. And then this solid state tripler would give you between 25 and 30,000 volts depending on what was needed. And that concept was used in many sets up until late 70s, early 80s. And then they came out with this type of transformer here. This is what they referred to, RCA referred to as an IHVT. Stood for Integrated High Voltage Transformer. This contained the actual transformer itself, the high voltage rectifier / tripler, the focus divider, and controls for focus and screen voltage. Now the earliest types of these IHVTs were bigger than this, but I think the old 1970s system where you had a separate flyback feeding a tripler was actually probably the best and most reliable means. Now yes, we replaced lots of triplers. I saw a lot of tripler failures in sets, especially Zenith and Sylvania, but you could get triplers. That wasn't an issue. There were generic triplers like the ECG 526, the 528, the 523, etc. And those triplers were used in a variety of brands of televisions. But when they switched to these IHVT style flyback transformers, there's not a whole lot of interchangeability there. You've got one flyback that was designed for a certain chassis family, and then another chassis, for example, will use a different type of flyback, so there's not a lot of interchangeability there. Now back in the 80s and 90s, in the early 2000s, there were companies that made generic flyback transformers. Some of these generics were of decent quality, some of them weren't, but I know back in the 90s I used a lot of NTE and ECG generic flyback transformers to fix various TVs, and they seemed to work okay. But the problem today is, and this has been an issue pretty much since flat panel TVs became the norm, to my knowledge nobody is making generic flyback transformers for these older sets anymore, and flyback transformers is a rare sight in the parts catalogs these days. Now you might get lucky and find a new old stock flyback, but that could take years and it could be costly. Now one thing I'll say about generics, if you have to use a generic flyback, stick with a name brand like ECG, NTE, SK, something like that. These no-name white box generics, I wouldn't trust them any further than I could throw them, because I've had issues with those. In the later days of the CRT era, I was given a big 36-inch RCA home theater console. I think it had a CTC 179 chassis in it, and the original flyback was burning. The insulation had broken down and the high voltage was arcing out the side of the transformer. So I called Tritronics, which I think is what they were known as at the time, and I said, I want a genuine RCA original part. I do not want a generic. Oh yes sir, this is a genuine RCA original. Well, guess what? They sent me some no-name white box generic, and it took about 45 minutes with me fiddling with the pins to get the flyback to drop into the circuit board. A factory original would have just dropped right in. So I finally got it installed, turned TV on, ran it about 15 or 20 minutes. It seemed to do okay. It was getting late that night, so I turned it off and said we'll deal with this tomorrow. Next day I pushed the power button and BAM! Loud snap, major stench, smoke coming out of the TV, and that brand new flyback had shorted, and the case was cracked all the way around the transformer, and there were little pieces of the windings that had blown apart hanging out of the crack in the transformer. So I called Tritronics and gave them an earful. I said, I told you I wanted an RCA original. I did not want this generic crap from China or Mexico or wherever it came from. And they swore up and down to me that it was an RCA original, but I knew it wasn't. I told them what happened and I demanded a refund. They didn't really want to do it, but they finally agreed, and I finally tracked down an RCA original, dropped it in, TV played perfectly. I was told that what happened with some of those white box generics, that some of the workers in these sweatshop factories that were building these things were highly pissed off for whatever reason, and they urinated in the potting mix that was used to build those transformers. So no wonder they basically shorted out within minutes of installing them in a set. Now in the early 80s, with the, what was it, CTC 101, 108, 110, maybe some of the early 120s, RCA had issues with those first run flybacks shorting out prematurely. But back then RCA made good on it and supplied an improved replacement flyback, as in RCA realized what the problem was and they took steps to correct it. And those updated flyback transformers, I don't recall ever running into a single one of them that was bad. You know, back then companies took measures to correct mistakes that they made. They don't do that so much today. But all we can do with these sets, with these newer type flybacks, is just run them until they burn up, and then if a suitable replacement can't be found, then you just scrap the TV, and that's about all you can do. Now in the old tube type sets, especially the old black and white stuff from the 50s and even the color stuff from the 60s, if you're good, you can sometimes adapt another type of flyback to work in that chassis, but that's not so much the case with these types of flyback transformers here. Now, as far as brands that were most trouble prone as far as flyback failures in 80s and 90s TVs, Samsung and Gold Star rate pretty high on the list, as does Panasonic and Quasar, which are both Matsushita. I've replaced a lot of bad Matsushita flybacks in 80s models. In fact, I had one blow up in my face one time. It was a set that I picked up off the side of the road and the power switch was bad. I replaced the switch, and I remember thinking, oh, this is an easy one for a change. And I didn't no sooner get that thought out of my head that the picture dimmed out, it lost horizontal sync, it pulled in on the side, and before I could turn the set off, that flyback blew up and stunk up the shop and all that good stuff. The Orion flybacks that were used in Emerson sets, those were a little better, but not much. AOC flybacks, I ran into a few of them that were blown apart, and some of those did not have generics available. As far as the better flyback transformers, I'd say probably RCA and Sanyo. Rarely ever replaced a flyback in those brands. Zenith was pretty good, although the ones in the 9-160 module were bad about arcing out and blowing up other things in the process. Hitachi, that was a pretty failure prone flyback, especially in the mid to late 80s and early 90s sets. MGA, Mitsubishi, I don't recall ever replacing a flyback in one of those sets. I think those were pretty good. Magnavox, replaced some flybacks in those, but they didn't seem to be as bad as the Korean and the Chinese imports. Sampo, which was Taiwanese, those like to eat flybacks. The Sylvania E32 and E34 chassis, that was their first chassis to use an IHVT style flyback, and those like to Well, those are a mixed bag. If you got a good one, they'd go 30 or 40 years and still be working, but if you got a bad one, they usually blew up in short order. And another thing that puts stress on these later flyback transformers is in the old solid state days, particularly with the American made sets, most of the operating voltages were obtained from the power transformer in the television. About the only things that you were getting off of the flyback were the high voltage for the second anode of the CRT and the boost voltage and the focus voltage for the CRT. But then in these later sets they eliminated the power transformer, and not only are you getting the high voltage, the screen voltage and focus voltage off the flyback, you're getting all of the other operating, a good many other operating voltages for the set. Now in this television, particular one, we have a switch mode power supply that supplies a good many voltages, but there are still other voltages that are supplied from this flyback transformer, and that just puts more stress on the part. Like the first Zenith System 3 set from late 78, K-Line I believe was the chassis designation. That particular model still used a power transformer that provided most of the voltages for the chassis, and then you had a 9-153 horizontal sweep module that contained integrated high voltage transformer, and it was much bigger than this thing. That, like I said, had the transformer itself, the tripler, focus divider, and all that built in a single package. I don't remember seeing one of those flybacks on the 9-153 module failing. Now the one that came after, the 9-160 module that did not have a power transformer and got everything off of the flyback secondary, the flyback in those was a fairly high failure part, and you could not get the flyback as a separate part. You had to replace the whole module. Alright, I had the flyback partially reinstalled, and so far I see 6 compromised connections, so we need to go get some hookup wire and then start jumpering from point A to point B. So what we're going to do is wrap the lead around the unsoldered pin on the flyback, crimp it, and then solder it in place there. Get that end soldered, so we just follow this trace back to here, and then we'll connect our other end of the wire to this point right here. Alright, to ensure a better connection, I desoldered this terminal here, and we're going to do just like we did with the flyback, trim our wire to the appropriate length, strip it, and bend it back in a, strip it, tin it, bend it back in a hook, crimp it on here, and solder it in place. Alright, that's jumper number 1, and we'll just do the others in similar fashion, and I'll be back when I'm done. Alright, we have everything that I can see jumpered out. There was 5 of them actually, and I guess the next step is to slide the chassis back in the set and try not to break anything this time and see if it'll work. Alright, before we crank this up, or try to crank it up, I'll add a little bit to my story about the dishonest TV shop that I knew of decades ago that would sabotage TVs to make it look like lightning nailed them. Another technician I knew who was an honest technician, somebody brought him a TV that was actually a legitimate lightning hit, but it only did minor damage. I think it was a typical shorted rectifier diode and blown fuse kind of deal, and he told the owner, and the owner said, "Yeah, but can't you make it not worth repairing?" And he said, "No ma'am, I can't." He said, I'm not gonna risk going to jail just so you can get a new TV out of the insurance company. And they weren't happy with him, but you know, I'm proud of him for not caving in. But it's like I told the dishonest guy one time, I said, you know, they have been known to perform sting operations just to see what will take place, and if they catch you sabotaging a TV or falsifying a claim just to get the customer a new TV and get you a little bit of money to boot, then your butt could go to jail, or at the very least pay a hefty fine. So it's just best not to do crap like that. You know, if a TV is legitimately destroyed from a lightning hit, then write it up as such. But if all it needs is a simple diode and fuse replacement, then let it go at that too. Don't be writing something up that ain't really there. Alright, the little green standby light's on. Alright, is it gonna go or blow? Well, we have high voltage, we have sound, and we have picture. So I think we're back in business on this one. Alright, we got the back on, which was a little bit of a chore because the board slides in a groove on the back cover, and since the board is a little bit misfigured now, that made it a little bit harder to get it into place. Also, there was a screw here, or there's a hole here on the AV jack input where it looks like a screw was. Well, I didn't have enough screws to account for a screw here, and I really don't remember removing one. So I went and robbed a screw out of my junk, and it's not grabbing onto anything, so I don't know if this ever had any kind of screw in it or not. I would have thought it would have, but I'm not going to worry about it. Where this TV is going to probably wind up, I don't care. If whoever's using anybody winds up with this and they plan on using the AV jacks, they just better be careful. Alright, let's see if it'll still fire up. And I don't mean literally. Alright, we're still in business. Let's see if he wins the $20,000. Somehow I doubt it. Well, you're going to need a big one. One more to go, and all you got's 100 points, so I think you're going to need a whopper, and I don't imagine he's going to get it. No, not even close. Alright, let's tune in some other channels and see what this looks like.
$900 in coverage. For $10,000 in coverage, he would pay over $110 a month.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
Fortunately, with Senior Life Insurance Company,
and simple to understand.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. I've seen better, I've seen worse, but it's watchable. And you really can't do any grayscale setup on this because you have to have a remote to access the service menu, and I don't even know how to access the service menu on these anyway, so we're just going to let it go just like it is. Like I said, for what I'm probably going to end up getting for this, which is probably going to be nothing. This was more or less just something to play with, and really the only reason I decided to go back in there and fix that crack is because I screwed it up. So like I was taught whenever I was growing up, you screw it up, you do what you can to fix it. So I took care of it. Alright, I turned the color down, and it has got a bit of a red push. Imagine that tube is just a little bit tired. Like I said, if I had a remote and could get in the menu, the service menu, I could probably do something about that, but I don't, and I'm not going to worry about it. It is what it is. I've got everything midway, contrast, bright, sharpness, color, tint, and we're just going to leave it at that.
Stabbing his ex-girlfriend more than 30 times in front of her.
I just go out of focus right when I'm about ready to hit the button. But anyway, when I initially tried this, I really wasn't paying that close attention to it, but after looking at it closer, I can tell that this tube is a little bit it's still usable, but it could stand a grayscale touch up. But like I said, I don't have the original remote or the service manual to know how to get into service mode. I might could find a free service manual download, but I'm not that interested in it. Alright, that's a little bit better focus. But, you know, if I didn't have a television and I ran across this and I couldn't get another TV because of financial reasons or whatever, I would be happy to have this. Yeah, the more I think about it, I remember doing a tube swap on the stereo version of a Samsung like this. I think that version had the side firing speakers, but I remember the set well. Some people I went to church with had a mid-80s Sanyo built Sears 19-inch with a bad flyback, and they didn't want to put a flyback in it, so they bought that new Samsung in the late 90s, and it lasted about 3 or 4 years, and the tube started going south in it. Well, they didn't want to put a tube in it, so they gave it to me, and then eventually I found a tube out of something and stuck it in there and ended up finding it a home. But like I already said, even in the 80s, these Samsung CRTs just didn't really hold up all that well. And I think my geometry is a little bit off too. That looks a little crooked. What I should have done was checked all that before I put the back on, but like I said, I didn't, and that back was a little difficult to get on. I'm not going to go rocking the boat, pulling that back off, and risk maybe flexing that board more and maybe cracking it worse than it already is, so it's just going to stay the way it is for the time being. Yeah, I think the green's a little bit weak on this. Why is it always the green gun? Seems like all these later sets I find with a weak tube, the green gun is weak in them. So I don't know what it is about green guns, but that's the way it is, I suppose. Well, I was looking online for a free service manual for that set. It's a model TXH 1970. Sam's has a photocopy for what, $20-something. This site here has a copy for $17.49. We're not really too keen on doing that for a TV I'm probably going to end up giving away, and I'm really not seeing much of anything else on here. I'll keep looking, but I don't know. Well, I found something on a TXH 1973. I don't know if that'll be close enough to do what we need to do or not, but we'll see. Well, as it happens, this manual covers a wide variety of models, and the TXH 1970 is one of them. And just as I suspected, you have to have the remote transmitter to enter service mode, which may or may not can be done with a universal remote. Some sets you can, some you can't, and I'm not really too interested in ordering a remote, whether it be an original factory remote or going and buying a universal remote to do this, because the cost of the remote would probably be what would probably exceed the value of the TV, sadly. No, on another note, it's rare that I watch broadcast over the air TV anymore. I probably haven't kept up with a current TV show in over 25 years. You know, just anything that's come on since the mid to late 90s really hasn't interested me that much, so I just really hadn't kept up with it. Mainly what I watch is older material that I have on DVD or videotape, but I'll occasionally try to watch something on one of the channels that shows older programs. Well, today I was trying to watch a show, and it was just endless commercials, endless, like a commercial break lasting 6 or 7 minutes. And most of the commercials consist of ambulance chaser lawyers, insurance, Medicare, that kind of crap, and it's just repetitious crap, and then you get back to the program and you go 4 or 5 minutes and you back to another string of commercials. In fact, it's gotten so bad that on some older shows that I'm familiar with, they edit out parts of the show to make room for more commercials. And I posted something on Facebook about that, and a general manager of one of the TV stations, who happens to be on my friends list, popped off and let me know that you want free over-the-air TV, but it's commercials that pay for it, and the cost to us to broadcast over the air has gone up exponentially, so you can't have it both ways. And I started to write back in and reply to him and let him know, but as far as I'm concerned, y'all could all go off the air. Wouldn't really affect me that much. I think a lot of it has to do with greed and more money is what it all boils down to. But when it gets to the point where you're running so many commercials that your viewers get so disgruntled that they turn the TV off and find something else to do, then you're really not accomplishing anything, are you? And there have been times that I got so disgusted with the one commercial after another, it seemed like forever, that I just turned the TV off and stormed off and found something else to do. I know back in the old days, whenever I would record something off the air, I would have the remote in hand so I could pause the VCR to edit out the commercials. And you know, the VCRs generally have a safety feature where if it's left in pause mode for more than 5 minutes, it'll shut off. Well, that didn't happen in the old days, but I can tell you in recent years, when I've recorded something and tried to edit out the commercials, there's been more than a few times when the VCR would shut off because the commercial breaks were too long, and it's just really uncalled for. But anyway, I downloaded this manual, so if I run up on a remote that doesn't cost me anything, I might try to enter the service mode and bump that green up a little bit. But the TV's got a watchable picture as is. I'm not overly worried about it. If I can find somebody to give me a few bucks for it, then they'll probably own it. But you know, I'm just not too... Honestly, I'm really not that interested in black plastic and gray plastic and silver plastic crap TVs from the 90s and 2000s, but like I said earlier in the video, when somebody messages me and says they have some televisions they want to give me, I hate to say no, because as sure as I do, one or more of the TVs will be something that I actually want that's old, or even if they're not old, these same people down the road might find an older one, but they'll say to themselves, well, I'm not going to call him because he wasn't interested in the last TVs I offered him, so I'm not even going to bother him with this one. I'll just haul it to the dump. But yeah, this doesn't look too terribly bad, but like I said, unless I can find a remote that'll let me get in the service mode, it's just going to disappear like this, because I know in this area this TV is not going to bring much, if it brings anything at all. Now, I know there's some parts of the country, and I know this because I see the stuff on Facebook that people can have a TV like this and fix it up and list it for sale for 85 bucks or 100 bucks or whatever, and it sells. And I'm not jealous, I'm happy for them, but it's just not that way in my area. But anyway, I've rambled on enough, I suppose, and that's about all I've got. So this TV here, just to recap, we opened it up, replaced a few problem caps that they really weren't bad, but I wanted to catch them before they went bad, and then I resoldered some connections, and then not paying attention to what I was doing, I ended up cracking the circuit board and had to fix that. The 25-inch Sanyo
Now 3 food rescue.
Same deal with that, except I didn't crack the board in that one. I just resoldered some things and replaced a few key capacitors. The same goes for the 19-inch Sanyo. The only issue now with the 25-inch Sanyo, it's stuck in AV mode because you have to have the remote to change the input over to RF. And then we've got the 20-inch RCA color track that just needed some ground connections and the tuner resoldered. So I guess that's about all I've got for now. Well, this is interesting. This is the Samsung remote that came with my mother's flat screen, the first one she bought in 2010. And it also will operate the Samsung flat screen from 2012 or 2014, the one I was given and fixed. And then she bought another Samsung flat screen in 2017, and it'll also work that one. And surprisingly, it also seems to control this CRT set. So maybe we can get in the service menu with this. Okay, with the set in standby mode, and let's try pushing the power button instead of the channel button. With the set in standby on the remote, we press mute 182 power, and that should turn it on in standby mode. So let me do this. Mute 182 power. Okay, that brought us into standby, into service mode. Let's see, adjustment. Unfortunately, the computer's in the house with the service manual on it, and I'm out here.
Are hoping to reduce their reliance on China, so that is another mutual benefit here. Champ.
Volume down, that brings up the list of adjustments while the camera goes out of focus. I've been playing with it some. Technically, you're supposed to do this with a pattern generator, but I'm using a black and white over-the-air picture, and we've got a white line now, so that's an improvement. And that's it with the contrast down, and it still looks pretty black and whitish to me. So we're going to just set everything to about midway and call it done. Alright, I can tell the tube's still a little soft. It's not as sharp as it could be, but it does look better than it did, and we're going to let it go with this. It still should have a fair amount of life left in it. It's not like the tube's totally dead, so this one's ready to find a new home. So yes, since Samsung was kind enough to use the same remote codes with the LCD sets as they did their later CRT sets, then we were able to accomplish our mission here without having to spend money on a remote.